Ever since humans have had the ability to fly through the skies, there have been remarkable structures to store planes and to give them proper places to take off. A lot of the time, air bases are hidden in secret, remote places, and just recently, photos of these locations have emerged. From Air Force bases hidden in the middle of the Pacific to bases left over from the Soviet Union, here are creepiest abandoned air bases. Number 11. Titos Underground Air Base. This formerly secret Air Force base operated under the Yugoslavian government and is located between the Bosnian and Croatian border. It's also one of the largest underground bases in Europe that we know about. Construction on this massive project began in 1948 to 1968, and it cost a reported $6 billion, making it also one of the most expensive military bases ever in Europe. This base was built sturdy enough to withstand a 20-kiloton nuclear bomb, deploy radar detection systems, and as an underground secret air base to store all kinds of planes, tanks, bombs, etc. This was used to the max in the early 1990s during the Yugoslav wars. However, it was also discovered and bombed eventually. The base was abandoned at the end of the war, but not by everyone. In modern times, the tunnel systems were used by drug smugglers and organ traffickers to get cargo from Bosnia to Serbia and vice versa. Number 10. Cirilo Airport. The Cirilo Airport, found in the Philippines, used to be in full active use in order to transport workers to copper mines. This typically took place in the mid-1990s and was primarily a base for commercial use. It's been shut down since 2006, but it may receive an occasional plane or two for tourists who want to see the vast jungles of the area. There are some plans to renovate the airport, but as of right now, it's looking pretty abandoned. Here we see the ruins of an abandoned office building, which at one point would have been housing people who worked for air traffic control. There's no word on when or if it'll ever return to its full glory. As of now, it's only operational a few times a year. Number 9. Erickson Air Station. Located in the Aleutian Island chain of Alaska, the Erickson Air Station is extremely remote and is only 200 miles off the coast of Russia. The base is only used occasionally, and the Air Force actually pays a group of contractors to keep it from basically being consumed by the snow. It was originally built as kind of an emergency landing zone for planes coming from Japan or Korea. As the Cold War began to get intense, it was later on used to place radar and anti-aircraft weaponry, but simply maintaining this place is quite the struggle. Spies would come here in order to check seismic activity from Russian nuclear tests, and in modern times, it's used as a sneaky place to possibly keep an eye on China, North Korea, and other stuff going on in Asia. Building an Air Force base this far west kind of makes the US seem a little aggressive to other countries, but for the most part, it seems to be abandoned. Number 8. Atoll. When the US was testing nuclear weapons in the Pacific, things began to get a little bit out of control, and some strange stuff was going on here. On Google Maps, you can see the runway where the bombers would take off in order to drop devastatingly powerful weapons. Over 22 massive nuclear and hydrogen bombs were dropped here. This photo shows a massive concrete lid placed over the crater of a nuclear test called Cactus in their attempt to contain the radioactive materials left over. This was a very beautiful island, known as Ruined Island, with much wildlife and tropical trees. Many strange experiments then took place here on this atoll, including one called Operation Ivy. They even tested unmanned airplanes flying through mushroom clouds after hydrogen bomb detonations to see how radioactive they can get. This island is now deemed uninhabitable for the next 24,000 years due to all the plutonium that's scattered here. The US basically began to feel bad for the inhabitants of the Marshall Islands nearby, and a massive cleanup effort took place to reduce the contamination that cost roughly $947 million. Number 7. The Johnston Atoll. Located in the heart of the Pacific, another extremely remote island has been under the control of the US military for the past 70 years, so you can probably imagine something crazy went on here. It was originally a bird sanctuary, but when the tests needed to be done, it was transformed into a naval refueling depot and airbase used to drop bombs on other innocent little islands in the Pacific. It was originally a bird sanctuary, but when tests needed to be done, it was transformed into a naval refueling depot and an airbase. It's been abandoned since 2004, and the government would just like to pretend this whole place never existed. A lot of shady stuff seemed to go on here, and many nuclear and biological weapons were stored on this island. The place was almost like the Area 51 of the Pacific. The activities that took place remained highly classified for quite some time. The area was used for atmospheric nuclear testing, and on July 9, 1962, a 1.4 megaton explosion was detonated at an altitude of 250 miles. This resulted in a massive electromagnetic pulse. This was dubbed Operation Starfish Prime, and it created a massive fireball in the sky, knocking out communications as far away as Hawaii. After a few failed nuclear tests that weren't supposed to explode, the island was seriously contaminated with weapons-grade plutonium. Other nuclear missiles stored here were going to be deployed as anti-satellite systems that would have seemed like they would have been overkill for anything in space. Maybe they were targeting something else? Number 6. Hopsaloo Airfield. Situated just a few miles away from the town of Hopsaloo, you'll find another creepy abandoned runway. This was once used to store long-range aircraft, possibly long enough to run attacks on the US. The Soviet military operated in this facility since they took over Estonia in the mid-1940s. It was used mainly for interceptor jets in case the US ever decided to attack Russia during the Cold War. The facility had 28 plane hangars and has just been sitting in an open field as a reminder of Estonia's occupied past. No one has really seen a reason to completely destroy the airfield. In fact, they began using it for drag races. Here at this airfield, you might see some drifting going on, which actually isn't even illegal in Estonia. The creepy buildings from the past seem to double as echo chambers as well, and they were built so well that they actually reflect any noise made inside. Number 5. Mongolian Air Base. Although it wasn't official, Mongolia was basically a part of the Soviet Union. They didn't want to seem too imperialistic and put China on alert, but they ended up having some air bases over here. With communist countries on both sides of Mongolia, it was heavily influenced by both of these powerful nations, but it mainly acted as a satellite nation to the USSR. In the 1970s, this air base was added and was seen as a way to protect themselves in case there was any territorial disputes with the Chinese. Here in this photo, we see the statue of a fighter jet. These armored aircraft shelters in the Gobi Desert you see in this photo were made to protect expensive aircraft from potential attacks and are designed with reinforced concrete. This random statue, which is now close to a grazing pasture for cattle, has an inscription on it that states, "Glory to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union." These large buildings house the officers and their soldiers in this very isolated environment. Number 4. The Cosmodrome, Kazakhstan. Many of the Soviet Union's new buildings were built far away from the capital city of Moscow and into occupied territories. Ralph Mireb captured some truly remarkable photos of an abandoned Soviet space shuttle and the inside of this building used to house it. The Soviet space program was actually quite successful, and this is where they launched the first satellite, Sputnik. The area in Kazakhstan is quite remote, so it really seemed as if no one had ever returned to this place since they left it. Here you see the inside of the cockpit of the space shuttle, where the pilots would have sat during missions. It's believed that this spacecraft actually made it into space at some point. Number 3. The Gila River Airport. This privately owned airport in Arizona is currently in a state of complete abandonment and most likely won't be seeing any flights for a while. It was formerly used for planes who were involved in crop dusting and who knows what else. Built in 1942, it was originally used by the US Army and went by the name of Williams Auxiliary Army Airfield No. 5. Some experimental jet aircraft were tested out here in the 1950s, and then this base was handed over for civilian use and renamed as Goodyear Airport. In the 1990s, operational usage ceased, and it's now just an aircraft boneyard, as you can tell. This was after the Gila River Indian community gained control of it, which resulted in eviction of commercial tenants. The last recorded aircraft operation was in 1983. Many of the aircraft have fallen victim to graffiti artists or just decay of the elements of the desert. Here we see an abandoned 1945 Lockheed PV-2D Harpoon, which has certainly seen better days. Number 2. Nicosia Airport, Cyprus. The Nicosia Airport on the Mediterranean island of Cyprus has a long history. It was once one of the main airports on this island nation. It's even been used as an air base during World War II for the Allies to launch attacks on northern Africa. In 1974, an unexpected event took place when Turkey sent armed forces onto the island of Cyprus. The airport became a scene of heavy fighting between Cyprus and the Turks. It's been abandoned ever since. However, the runway is occasionally used by the UN during peacekeeping missions. Here we see some of the seats on the inside of the airport deteriorating inside one of the terminals. The Turks claim that ethnic Turkish people living in the area were targets of genocide. As a result of the invasion, the city of Varosha became completely abandoned as well. It was once the site of a beautifully touristic beachside city. Instead of bright shining lights that were once there, the only thing you'll see are the hotels with broken windows and crumbling walls. Luckily, photographers were still able to snatch some good photos of what still remains of this area, although it's forbidden by the Turkish. Number 1. Croydon Airport, UK. This historical airport has seen legendary pilots such as Charles Lindbergh during a transatlantic flight in 1927, and even pilot lessons by Winston Churchill. It was originally built during World War I after a Zeppelin bombing raid took place on London, and it is the first major international airport constructed by the UK. It was rapidly built with factories to build planes and munitions. As of right now, however, it's basically a giant museum. Although much of the runway has been built over, the main terminal has been preserved and is known as the Airport House. The Croydon Airport was a target during World War II, and in 1940, it was the site of a major air raid in the London area. The main armory was destroyed during the Battle of Britain, and the civilian airport also took a hit. It was quite difficult to defend the attack, and it wasn't used much again until 1944. With suburban areas beginning to expand, in 1952 it was decided that the airport would close, and in 1959 it saw its last flight. As you walk around the area, you can still see quite clearly that parts of it still stand as a memorial for those who fought in order to keep Britain free.